of the month at noon Mountain, we will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your questions, as all of you are muted on this presentation. Your questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Robert Penn. Robert is a third-generation antique dealer, began his numismatic journey in California during the 90s. His service in the Air Force took him around the world, allowing him to build a unique collection of exonumia. He is a researcher and specialist in Columbiana and exonumia and has participated in the ANA Collector competitive exhibits. Robert is also a proud member of the Metal Collectors of America and a life member of the ANA. He is the author of Striking History, the U.S. Mint at the Chicago World's Fair. Robert will be presenting From Coinage to Legacy, exploring the U.S. Mint's impact on the Chicago World's Fair. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Paula, and hello to everyone. And a big thank you to the ANA for giving me this platform. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and present full screen for everybody real quick.
Great. And I'm gonna mute and turn my camera off, but let me know if you need something. I'll be right here.
Yeah. All right, so we'll be going over the Chicago's Day of Days, Titans of Art in Architecture, the U.S. Mint exhibit, the Columbian half dollar, the Isabella quarter dollar, the Columbian Exposition Award Medal, and the overall legacy of the U.S. Mint. We have so much information to cover in this presentation, with most of it being original research and a few discoveries too. So let's go ahead and get started. Our starting point for the Columbian Exposition will be Chicago Day of Days, which was the grand opening of the fair. The World's Fair opened on May 1st, 1893, to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus landing in the Americas. Over 250,000 people were there for opening day. Also at the opening was the Duke of Aragua, who was a direct descendant of Christopher Columbus. Now, if you look at the photo to the left, there stands President Cleveland delivering his speech and ready to press the button that started the fair. So this next photo has a lot going on and is a bit ridiculous by today's safety standards, but it captures how busy and popular the exposition was. The Chicago City Railway had a cable line from downtown Chicago along Cottage Grove Avenue. Visitors can enter the fair through the western entrance of the Midway Plaisance, which was about 1 mile from the U.S. government building and the other main buildings in the park. And had you been there and strolled down the Midway, the Ferris wheel would have greeted you. And here it is. And just a side note, George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., the creator of the Ferris wheel, and Bethlehem Iron Company, the maker of the axle used on the Ferris wheel, each received a Columbian Exposition Award Medal. It would be remiss of me to not include some of the titans of art and architecture that brought the fair to life. The fair assembled some of America's most famed figures in architecture, art, and design. American sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens served as an advisor on the fair's sculptural program. He also was a juror for the Department of Fine Arts. At an 1891 meeting, he declared to Daniel Burnham, the fair's director of works, "Look here, old fellow, do you realize that this is the greatest meeting of artists since the 15th century?" And Daniel Burnham is regarded as one of the greatest figures in American architecture. As the director of works for the fair, he oversaw its construction and design, bringing together some of the brightest minds and most accomplished figures in architecture, art, and design. His firm, Burnham and Root, designed the Montauk Block. It was considered a precursor to modern-day skyscrapers. And there he is right there. And his quote is, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble, logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we are gone, be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember that our sons and grandsons are going to do things that would stagger us." John Wellborn Root, along with his business partner Daniel H. Burnham, led one of the most important and influential firms during the latter part of the 19th century. Root was one of the foremost figures in the Chicago School of Commercial American Architecture. He was a consulting architect for the fair, responsible for designing the overall layout of the world's Columbian Exposition. He died of pneumonia while working on the fair in 1891. His son, John Wellborn Root Jr., was his namesake. Charles Bowler Atwood was designer-in-chief of the world's Columbian Exposition. During the fair, he was known for his prolific work, designing over 60 structures. His most acclaimed creation was the neoclassical masterpiece, the Palace of Fine Arts. It was the only building that was structurally sound and still stands to this day. It was designed to protect the priceless works of art on display. Marveling at its beauty, Augustus St. Gaudens commented, "There has been nothing equal to it since the Parthenon." Atwood passed away on December 19, 1895, at the age of 46. The official cause of death was listed as overwork. However, Burnham later told this biographer, Charles Moore, that Atwood had become addicted to opium, which ultimately destroyed his health. Now, this title should catch your attention. During the planning and building phase, the railroad and banking industries backed the fair and were banking on it to succeed. In the book, A History of the World's Columbian Exposition, Volume 1, the Finance, Ways, and Means Committee recorded. But the Committee in Finance was not yet at the end of its resources. There was on hand over $1 million in souvenir coins, the sale of which at $1 each was proceeding slowly. The banks of Chicago agreed to take and hold these coins as part of their legal reserve, advancing to the exposition the par value of the coins as a loan. This loan was made to the exposition by most of the banks without any charge for interest. When the money provided by the loan upon coins had been expended, the 1st of May was at hand, and the long period of disbursement without earnings was at an end. The Ways and Means Committee was also responsible for concessions of all kinds during the fair. Now, this is a great piece of advertising by Remington. It's a correct map of the exposition grounds, showing the number and locality of Remington standard typewriters in service. Each red star indicates the locality of one or more Remington typewriters, showing a total of over 370 Remingtons in use by the exposition, exhibitors, government officials. And the red arrow points towards the government building. And from my count, there was just 23 typewriters used in the government building. The U.S. government building was designed by W.J. Edbrook. From 1891 to 1893, he was the supervising architect of the Treasury. The U.S. government building housed the federal exhibits, including the Mint Bureau, as it was then called. The ground plan shows the Mint Bureau in a prime location besides the rotunda. The Mint's neighboring exhibits included the U.S. Postal Service, the IRS, and the Coast and Geodetic Survey. The Survey of the Coast was part of the Treasury Department and served as the nation's only scientific agency responsible for mapping and charting the U.S. coastline. In all, Congress allocated over $1.3 million for government exhibit buildings. The preparation for the U.S. Mint exhibit began under the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Alura Nettleton. After his retirement, the work was taken over by Frederick A. Stocks, the chief clerk of the Treasury Department, who represented its various bureaus at the fair. And the Mint Bureau itself was a major attraction, drawing crowds eager to see a 4-ton coining press from the Philadelphia Mint in action. You will also notice some other names are absent on this photo collage. Some of these official programs were published at different times and only captured the individuals who were there in that position. If you notice the 4th photo, is the Frederick stocks from the Treasury Department. The Mint exhibit had on display one of the most comprehensive numismatic collections in existence, including a complete collection of all coins issued at the Mint from its establishment going all the way back to 1792. And the photo on the left is a glass-slide negative of the U.S. Treasury Department's exhibit. The right side photo is from Shep's World's Fair photograph book, and it shows the Mint cabinet with a member of the Columbian Guard, who were the fair's private security forces. There are two souvenir medals sold by the U.S. Mint at the fair. One of these is the World's Columbian Exposition official medal. It was engraved by George Morgan. It came in a brass oride composition, and Mint authorized gold-plated varieties exist. It was struck in both large and small letter varieties, and the small letter variety features two distinct obverse dies, one with the raised flag and one with the lower flag. The surface finish of this brass metal easily became tarnished when handled, and there were some accounts of buyers wanting to return tarnished metals in exchange for freshly minted ones at the fair. Mr. Stocks decided to have the metals gold-plated. The plating was carried out in the electrical building at a cost of $35 per thousand. Gold-plated metal sales began on August the 1st. And these metals were sold for 25 cents and were very popular souvenirs at the fair. For example, a single day's worth of sale in June recorded 1,104 metals sold. The other one is President Grover Cleveland's visit to the U.S. Mint exhibit medal. It was engraved by Charles Barber. It was also struck in the same brass oride composition. Now, this portrait may look familiar as it was also used on President Cleveland's 1885 and 1893 inaugural Mint medals. And the Mint dies were retired just a month after being put into service. And if you note the stylized typeface of the letters C and G in the central four-line inscription on the reverse, which reads, World's Columbian Exposition, Chicago. This style of lettering was common during the period and used throughout the fair, on souvenirs, and print advertising. On August 5, 1892, Congress passed Public Law 52-203, the Columbian Exposition Coin Act, authorizing the Columbian half-dollar. The obverse was engraved by Charles Barber and the reverse by George Morgan. The Columbian half-dollar were sold for $1 apiece at the fair. Now, there is so much media hype surrounding the Columbian half-dollar. I included this newspaper ad to illustrate the media's attention on this coin and how you must act quickly to secure a coin. Justice to all, the merchants, the fortunate possessors. $10,000 was paid for the first coin. They are all alike. The issue is limited, and time must enhance their value. The price is $1 each. How to get the coins. Does this remind you of any modern day sales pitch? We'll just leave it at that. The Columbian half-dollar's design is credited to Olin Levi Warner and was inspired by a Columbus painting that was attributed to the 16th century artist Lorenzo Lato. Board member James Ellsworth acquired the Lato portrait in hopes of it being used to design the half-dollar. Charles Barber and George Morgan did not credit Warner for the design. Also, early numismatic literature disregarded Warner's role, and there was an absence of documentation in early mint records. And the illustration on the left is an early prelim design created in part to attract public attention through the media. So here's the timeline of events for the $10,000 beauty, which was a nickname given to the Remington specimen. In August 1892, the Chicago Evening Post was the first to publicly suggest that the minted proof Columbian half-dollar be sold at a premium. September 29, 1892, the firm Wyckoff, Siemens, and Benedict Owners of Remington placed a $10,000 silent bid. On the 19th of November, the Philadelphia Mint struck the first Columbian half dollars. And the 19th of December, bidding closed with payment made by certified check. And Harlow Hickenbotham, who was the president of the World's Columbian Exposition, presented the coin to the Remington Typewriter Company, and the coin remained on display at their exhibit throughout the fair. So what became of the first proof Columbian half dollar? Mr. McLean, representing the firm Wyckoff, Siemens, and Benedict, delivered it to the president of the World's Columbian Exposition, accompanied by a letter formally transferring it for presentation to a Chicago institution of his choosing. The Columbian Museum of Chicago, now the Field Museum, was chosen as a benefactor. And this newspaper ad mentions Remington was awarded a contract to supply all of the typewriters at the fair, and there were several hundred needed. The average selling price of a Remington typewriter in 1893 was around $100. While researching for my book, I went down several numismatic rabbit holes. I came across this newspaper article by the Sterling Daily Standard. The sentence that stood out to me was, about the 1st of June of this year, the coin was removed from the vault, and an expert from Spalding's engraved a private mark on its face. So in late 2023, I reached out to the Field Museum. I got in touch with Gretchen Rings, who is the museum's head of library collection, and yes, it's in the museum's library collection. She inspected the coin with assistance from the museum's conservation department under 10 times magnification, and there is no private mark found. Now, as a numismatist, it was important for me to follow up on the story over a century later. For those of you watching, what would your opinion be if the coin had been engraved? So this is the Columbian half-dollar obelisk. According to Trumbull White and William Eaglehart in their book, The World's Columbian Exposition, on pages 105 to 106, it reads, upon the main floor of the building and under the very center of the arches of the tower stands an obelisk made of silver half dollars, souvenir coins, made exactly in the model of the noted monument at Washington, D.C. This column of silver is one of the greatest attractions to visitors in the entire building. It is some 40 feet high, and thousands of coins were used in the construction of it. I did some quick math, and it would take approximately 5,671 Colombian half dollars to reach a height of 40 feet, and that is just for a single column. Now, my immediate thought is, what happened to these coins? Were they spent or melted by the owner? But some things will always remain a mystery. So this mint regulation was issued in 1890, and I included this slide in the presentation for all of the coin collectors out there. There has been some debate on what constitutes a proof issue during this period, in particular the Isabella quarter dollar. The definition of a proof coin per U.S. Mint regulation: a proof coin is one struck by hand on a screw press from a specially polished die using a polished blank. On March 3rd, 1893, the Sundry Civil Appropriations Bill was signed into law, including a provision authorizing the production of the Isabella quarter dollar. It was engraved by Charles Barber. The quarter dollar were sold for $1 a piece at the fair, the same price as the half dollar. Over 15,000 quarter dollars were returned to the government for melting. In 1896, Robert Preston, the director of the mint, instructed the superintendent of the Philadelphia Mint to strike $3,500 worth in coins to replace the amount that was melted. The Isabella quarter was championed by influential women, including Bertha Palmer. She was president of the board of lady managers. A Chicago socialite and businesswoman, she rebuilt her husband's wealth after the Great Fire of 1871 and successfully petitioned Congress to establish the board. The board consisted of 117 members, including 2 reps from each state, territory, DC, and members at large. And a fun fact, each member voted herself an Isabella quarter dollar during the fair. We all know Susan B. Anthony as a suffragist, abolitionist, and champion for women's rights, fighting for equality and representation. But without her lobbying efforts, the Isabella quarter would likely not exist. She played a key role in pushing for the 1890 law that ensured women's involvement in the Columbian Exposition. And during the fair, she gave several speeches at the World's Congress of Representative Women. The lady managers originally chose sculptor Caroline Cheever Peddle to design the quarter dollar. Her design featured a seated Queen Isabella on the obverse and the inscription that's pictured on the prelim design. However, the Treasury Secretary required only Isabella's head on the obverse, and the reverse design was deemed too promotional. She was restricted to revising the obverse alone. Caroline ultimately resigned, citing artistic disagreements and mint constraints. In April 1893, Charles Barber was tasked with completing the design. So was Kenyon Cox involved with the Isabella quarter dollar's final design? In short, no. The story of the Isabella quarter dollar obverse design is often misunderstood and misattributed. At the time of the fair, some print guides and newspaper credited Kenyon Cox with the design, and this went unchallenged for decades. However, in the 1960s, one of Kenyon's sons mentioned that his father had no involvement in the final design. The newspaper clipping reads in part, "General satisfaction was expressed by all the lady managers who saw for the first time the design for the obverse side of the Isabella quarter submitted by the Director of the United States Mint. The design represents the head of Queen Isabella, and the coin will be the first one ever issued by the government bearing the portrait of a woman." Now that Charles Barber was tasked with designing and engraving the obverse and reverse, he surely had to find inspiration on a design. So what do you do in the 1890s before social media, the internet, and even something that we consider antiquated now as a simple fax? You had to source physical information from art and printed materials. Maxwell Somersville was an author and professor of glyptology, which is the study of engraved gems, and he worked at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Somerville offered to show Colonel Bosbyshell, superintendent of the Philadelphia Mint, and Mint Director Leach the painting of Donna Isabella the Catholic, which was at the time believed to be painted by Antonio de Rincon, who was a court painter for the Catholic monarchs. So who inspired Charles Barber's obverse portrait design? So now we've ruled out where the inspiration did not come from. So once again, I find myself going back into the numismatic rabbit hole. And one of the most exciting things about numismatics, especially with a bit of patience, is that there's always something new to uncover. So I discovered this engraving to the left while researching for my book and had a eureka moment. I immediately realized that this image closely resembled the Isabella quarter dollar with too many stylistic design choices to be just a coincidence. What's even more fascinating is that despite the many artistic depictions of Queen Isabella, none come close to this design. The first two people I showed it to, my wife and my 11-year-old son, aren't into numismatics, yet both immediately noticed the similarities in the design. It was a litmus test moment. So it seems as fate would have it, the final design of the Isabella quarter was designed by a woman. There is a French connection. It was produced by a brother and sister team, Clara Thenon and Adrian Nargio. The illustration was drawn by Clara and engraved by Adrian. It was published in Universal History by Albert Laponneret. And one interesting thing to Note, once I located the full sheet of the etching, you can see the attribution of the artist is directly referenced on the print, using 19th century printmakers' abbreviations. Below where the portrait would be, it reads MME for Madam, Thina Nargio, DT, which is drawn by Nargio Sculpt, short for engraver. This was published in the 1850 edition of the book Universal History. It was later reproduced in Great Men and Famous Women, Volume 3, Statesmen and Sages, 1894. The 1850 edition was published 6 years before Kenyon Cox was born. For this comparison, I removed the field of the quarter to focus solely on the relief of Queen Isabella. I colorized the illustration to highlight areas that align with the quarter's design. Considering the proportions and design limitations for a coin, the similarities are undeniable. The crown's palisado are spikes, and the edge of the left shoulder were excluded to direct attention to the main design features. And although not an exact design match, the spikes and shoulder's edge still display similarities. Going into the design, both exhibit a uniform left-facing profile of Queen Isabella, adorned with the heraldic crown of Castile. The coffia, or headdress, and beadwork are analogous, with the bead count and alignment around the coffia and the neckline matching the engraving. And note the placement of the non-stylized fleur-de-lis on the chest and the latticework pattern is consistent across both designs. So what became of the first Isabella quarters? Throughout the fair, Mrs. Palmer received numerous inquiries from attendees eager to obtain an example of the newly minted Isabella quarter dollar. However, it wasn't until the following spring that she decided to place these historic coins up for auction. The first, 400th, 1492nd, and 1892nd Isabella quarters were displayed for 3 months at Tiffany & Company's headquarters in New York City to promote the sale, with the proceeds intended to establish educational scholarships for young women. So the previous slide mentions a Professor George Kuntz. He was America's first gemologist, a coin collector, and an agent of Tiffany & Company, and later became their vice president. He earned 7 awards at the Columbian Exposition for gems and minerals, meteorites, and for numismatics, a collective display showcasing the metallurgy of coinage, instruments, relics, and metals. And a fun fact about Kuntz, in 1923, he married his second wife, fittingly named Opal. Kuntz also identified a new variety of a mineral which he named kunzite in his honor. The Columbian Exposition Coin Act called for 50,000 bronze medals to be struck and awarded to exhibitors at the fair. The final production fell short of that number. The obverse was designed by St. Gaudens and the reverse by Charles Barber. And in my opinion, this is a great photo of Augusta St. Gaudens. It's very Lincoln-esque. And here's a glimpse into the history and design of the award medal. In October 1893, St. Gaudens submitted the designs to the Quadricentennial Committee of the United States Senate. The verse depicts Christopher Columbus in full pose, making landfall, arms outstretched, symbolically embracing the New World with 3 male figures. The motto, "Further Beyond," is flanked by the Pillars of Hercules and placed above the inscription Christopher Columbus. And that year is 1492, October the 12th, when he landed in the Bahamas. The next surge, Augustus St. Gaudens, made it. St. Gaudens' reverse design, featuring a naked male symbolizing the spirit of a young America, faced criticism. The Quadricentennial Committee deemed it inappropriate, as well as 2 later versions, one with cover genitalia and another figure featuring an eagle within a wreath. In the interim, Charles Barber, chief engraver at the Mint, submitted a new reverse design. The design featured a central tablet with the inscription World's Columbian Exposition in commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the landing of Columbus and the dates 1892 and 1893. The tablet is flanked by torches of knowledge with a globe atop and two winged females representing fame and knowledge. The Santa Maria sails throughout are Art Nouveau waves, and in extra it also reads, CE for Charles Barber made it. By June 1894, the plaster model of the reverse was approved by the Secretary of the Treasury. The production of the Ward medal was outsourced to the Scoville Manufacturing Company, with the U.S. Mint responsible for creating the hubs and dies. The photo shows Scoville's Brass Works division, which was part of the company that produced the award medal. And this photo was taken around the same time the award medals were finally issued, circa 1896. John Boyd Thatcher was appointed by President Benjamin Harrison in 1890 as a Columbian Exposition Commissioner from New York, and also served as chairman of the Executive Committee on Awards. He established a thorough selection process, reaching out to over 2,500 academic journals and periodicals to gather recommendations for specialized subject matter experts. The fair featured approximately 250,000 exhibits, 65,422 exhibitors, and 23,568 awards. The percentage of awards given at the fair was lower than in any previous international exposition, a point reported by the Boston Globe in 1895. Thatcher selected more than 400 domestic judges and 225 foreign judges. So who were the award winners? They came from all industries. They were inventors, entrepreneurs, artists, cattlemen, collectors, and even nobility. I mentioned cattlemen because there were a ton of livestock exhibited. Some of the ones I found interesting are the Boston Rubber Shoe Company. It was the original business that became Converse. Eastman Kodak, they created the first Kodak camera that came out just 5 years before the exposition. And Parker Brothers. Office Boy was a precursor to the Monopoly game, and they also won an award in part for Bagatelle, a French tabletop parlor game that was a precursor to pinball. And perhaps one of the most important winners of all, drum roll please. Oops, I actually meant toilet paper roll. Yes, the Scott Paper Company. Let's give them a round of applause because they're the ones who invented the toilet paper roll. Some numismatic related awards were given to Coleman P. Hyman, An Account of the Coins, Coinage, and Currency of Australia, the author, along with his collection of tokens and early currency of Australia. The Imperial Mint of Japan Department of Finance for gold, silver, and copper coins and medals. The Numismatic and Antiquarian Society of Philadelphia for a collection of American historical medals and paper money. The Smithsonian for a collection of metallic money from the American colonies, and the Western Banknote and Engraving Company for steel plate and lithographic engravings. Also, Tiffany & Company and Gore Manufacturers of Fine Silver also won prizes for medallic designs. Institutions and foreign dignitaries, including Queen Victoria of England, received bronze medal specimens. Solid aluminum and plated varieties in silver and gold exist. And again, over 23,000 bronze medals were awarded. Mrs. Palmer also pushed for funds to create duplicate medals and diplomas for the craftsmen who designed the displays. At the time, her argument was that only the award winners were recognized, even though the displays that earned those awards were crafted by skilled workers. She wanted to make sure the craftsmen received recognition for their hard work. Award recipients did not receive medals until 1896. Most awardees were unhappy with the delay and took to the press to show their dissatisfaction. But as they say, better late than never, right? As you can see in the article, by the end of January 1896, the award medals were finally ready for distribution, and by late April, they were finally being delivered. The long-expected distribution of Columbian World's Fair diplomas and medals has begun at last, and today about 3,000 diplomas and medals covering all of the successful German exhibitors at the fair were turned over to Baron Thielmann, the German ambassador, who will ship them immediately to his government for distribution. Those awarded to American exhibitors will be ready for delivery within the next 10 days or 2 weeks at the farthest, and the shipments to England, France, Russia, Spain, Italy, and other foreign countries will be ready for delivery to the respective diplomatic representatives here within the next month. So this is a rare and an unusual example of a facsimile medal for R. Thorne and Sons Limited. They won a single award for their Scotch whiskey. It was likely presented to a business associate or given as a souvenir to someone closely tied to the business. And I just acquired this medal, so it came just in time for the presentation. And I believe there are only 3 examples known. Next is among the most significant of all Columbian Exposition Award medals, the President Cleveland specimen, one of 3 known aluminum examples. Others include John G. Carlisle, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and one with a blank die insert. This composition is unlisted in Eaglet Rugelow and Catherine Yeager and Q. David Bauer's book, 100 Greatest Metals and Tokens. And why was aluminum used? In the early 19th century, aluminum was considered a precious metal that far exceeded the value of gold and silver. The French government displayed aluminum bars alongside the crown jewels, and Napoleon used aluminum cutlery for his most important guest, while others had to settle for measly gold. The complete package that was issued with the award medal was an outer cardboard case that fits over the wooden box, not pictured, an aluminum case, a wooden box, and 2 corrugated boards, and a Scoville Company paper insert were issued with the Columbian Exposition Award medal for presentation. My favorite piece of all the accessories has to be the antique corrugated boards. The example I have looks just as good as something that was made today. This is the World's Columbian Commission diploma. Originals are hard to come by, but are a piece of fine art, in my opinion. It was produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in 1893. For this example, I requested a scan of the diploma from the Art Gallery of New South Wales when I was visiting Sydney, Australia. It was awarded to Miss L.A. Saxby for an oil painting of Govet's Leap in New South Wales. Next up, we have the World's Columbian Exposition, St. Gaudens's so-called dollar. There are 5 drop-in die insert varieties known. C. Emmerich and Company and Chase Emmerich and Company, which is the same business, were manufacturers of feather pillows and down goods. W. W. Kimball Company were organ and piano manufacturers. Frederick Stearns were merchants of perfumes, pharmaceuticals, elixirs, and other remedies. The 5th drop-in die insert variety and latest discovery is this gilt example. It has lettering that is faintly visible on the reverse. It partially reads G period F, a couple dashes, LBO, and a couple more spaces. And these have a size tolerance of 0.25 millimeters, and they range in size of 38.25 to 38.5 millimeters. For many Americans, the first time seeing the award medal was through print advertisement. The American Type Founders Company became the world's largest producer of foundry type, offering typefaces, fonts, printing materials, engravings, and electrotype cuts. Its McKellar, Smiths, and Jordan branch produce electrotype cut engravings of the Columbian Exposition Award Medal. And I just love their work. This engraving has so much depth to it. It looks close in detail as the actual medal. All right. Electrotype cut engravings were produced for the Columbian Exposition Award Medal recipients and used in print advertising. The American Type Founders were the only authorized engravers for the Columbian Exposition medals. An act of Congress passed on March 2nd, 1895, prohibits the reproduction of this medal by any means, including photography, lithography, electrotyping, or drawing, under penalty of fine and imprisonment. So it's a little bit harsh there with their imprisonment thing, but they wanted to protect that brand. In the April 1896 issue of the American Journal of Numismatics, an article was published detailing the electrotype cut process, which were first reproduced by a drawing and engraved in wood. From the wood engraving, the electro was reproduced. It was our endeavor to reproduce the metal by photo process, but this was found impractical on account of the very fine shading which would not print under usual conditions, as observed by the printers. It was therefore necessary to engrave the entire metal, which was done by several engravers, each one engraving that part of the work in which he was most proficient. And we have one honorable mention, Francis Davis Millet. He designed the Civil War Campaign Medal, Spanish Campaign Medal, the U.S. Army version, and the Philippine Campaign Medal. And another fun fact, American painter John Singer Sargent and Augustus St. Gaudens attended his Paris wedding in 1879. Mark Twain was also a close friend and served as his best man. Millet perished in the sinking of the Titanic at the age of 63. He was very involved in all of the illustrations of the buildings of the warfare. And also, if you can see in that little newspaper clipping, he designed the Columbian Guard badge souvenirs. And the legacy highlights of the U.S. Mint at the World's Fair. The U.S. Mint commemorative series, it all started with the Columbian half dollar. The U.S. Mint's outreach, over 125 years going strong with public engagement and sales at coin and trade shows. The Columbian Exposition Award served as a marketing tool, boosting prestige and brand recognition for companies and individuals, kind of like how Michelin stars or Grammy Awards do today. And last, the Columbian Exposition marked the start of Augustus St. Gaudens' major involvement with U.S. Mint designs, shaping his lasting influence on American coinage. And to wrap things up, I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes because it really hits the bullseye when it comes to the most important resource we all have. Time is the coin of your life. It is the only coin you have, and only you can determine how it will be spent. Be careful lest you let other people spend it for you. All right, Paul, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share.
Thank you so much.
Not at all.
What's that?
I said, not at all, my pleasure.
Yes, of course. You asked a question like midway through about a coin.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody's responding, mixed feelings. I was appalled at first that it had been marked, but then the defacement of coins is as old as minted coinage. That too is part of history.
That is true, and thankfully, it actually wasn't engraved. They did inspect it under 10 times magnification and she couldn't find anything. I almost wanted to ask her, like, could you double and triple check?
Yeah.
But maybe one day I can pay a visit there just to, have a second set of eyes. But from what she said, it was not engraved in the obverse.
Yeah, it sounds like you had some great research. We love
Definitely.
that. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in that Q&A. Somebody else just wanted to let you know that that was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to kind of do a little wrap up just to give everybody some information, and we'll come back and check
Sure.
on questions. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. Our NumismaTalks are being recorded and will be available on our website once they're edited. Please be sure to check for future programs on our website at money.org under the education tab. Let's see, I've got very thorough, always happy to learn. Thank you for sharing it with us. Yeah,
My pleasure.
I love, this is something a little bit different, so it's kind of fun for me too. So you're
I
getting a
think
lot
it's
of
good to
praise.
put the people with the faces of the coins too, as well, just to know the story behind those individuals.
Yeah. Names I've heard a lot of, but not the faces. So that's great. We've just got a lot of thank yous, Robert. So I'm going to let that be it and say thank you so much for being here, and everybody else that was participating and watching. Thank you so much. You guys have a great day.